On my son's 19th birthday, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "The best gift you could give me is to disappear from my life forever." I didn't argue. I didn't even ask why. I just smiled, turned around, and let him enjoy his party. An hour later, flashing red and blue lights washed over my yard, and 2 police cruisers pulled up. Officers stepped out, surrounded my property, and arrested my son. You won't believe what led to that moment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The chocolate cake in my left hand wobbled as I reached for the back door handle. 19 candles were waiting in the kitchen drawer. But first, I wanted to surprise Ryan with this homemade masterpiece. Under my right arm was a small velvet box inside the antique watch he'd admired months ago. A gift that had been passed down from my father. It wasn't just a watch. It was one of the few things my father left me when he passed away. A sturdy gold case piece with a face worn smooth at the edges, still keeping perfect time after half a century. I'd had it cleaned, the band replaced with soft brown leather. I imagined Ryan wearing it at job interviews, maybe at his wedding one day. Through the sliding glass door, the April evening light poured in soft and gold, painting the living room with long shadows. I could hear the chatter outside, the easy rhythm of voices that didn't expect to be overheard. The smell of grilled burgers drifted in, with the faint tang of cigarette smoke. I shifted the cake, trying not to smudge the lettering I'd piped earlier. Happy 19th, Ryan. My palms were sweating, and I told myself it was just from carrying too much at once. Then Kyle's voice cut through. Loud, carefree. "Man, your dad went all out. New sound system, top shelf beer. You even got that catering crew for the appetizers." Ryan's voice followed, smooth and dismissive, a tone I'd heard too often lately. "Yeah, well, he's trying to buy my affection as usual. Thinks money fixes everything." The words landed like a hammer. I froze, my fingers tightening around the cake plate until the cardboard flexed. Derek chimed in. "At least he cares. My old man barely calls." Ryan didn't miss a beat. "I'm tired of him breathing down my neck about getting a job, moving out, and taking responsibility, like he doesn't understand how hard it is right now." I watched him gesture with his beer bottle, the amber liquid catching the light before he took a long drink. And then came the line, the one that split the day in half. "Honestly, the best gift he could give me is to disappear from my life forever." It was said casually, almost lazily, but it was sharp enough to cut through the glass and into me. Kyle laughed. Derek shook his head with a smirk. From the patio table, Melissa, her eyes never leaving. Her phone called out. "You could always move out." Ryan shot back with what money, he controls everything. Acts like I'm still a kid. More laughter. I stood there rooted to the spot, the cool metal of the door handle against my fingertips. 19 years of birthdays, baseball games, homework nights, and hospital visits reduced to a punchline. I took one slow step back from the door, careful not to make a sound. The cake tilted. I steadied it just in time. The velvet box under my arm felt like a lead weight. I sat both down on the counter inside without turning on the light. The kitchen smelled faintly of the roast I'd made earlier, now cooling on the stove untouched. The dining table was set with plates I'd chosen that morning, thinking we'd all eat together before cake. It looked staged now, like a display in a store window. Beautiful, but not for us. I leaned against the counter, letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the silence. Outside, Ryan was telling a story, something about me embarrassing him in front of a car salesman last year. I could hear the laughter rise again. I don't remember deciding to sit down, but suddenly I was in the chair at the end of the table staring at the watch box, my father's watch. Dad had worn it every day. He used to say, "A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back, so spend it on what matters." I'd spent almost 20 decades of my time on Ryan. Shelter, food, tuition, bail money once, though he never told his mother about that. And now he wanted me gone. I thought about stepping outside, handing him the cake, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. That would be easier, quieter, keep the peace. But something in me had shifted. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was colder than that. Clearer, like the click of a gear sliding into place. From my seat, I could see through the glass door. Ryan leaned against the grill, the smoke curling up around his head like a crown he didn't deserve. Kyle handed him another beer. Melissa finally looked up from her phone long enough to smile at something he said. I realized they were all standing on something I paid for, the deck I'd built with my own hands, the grill I'd bought for last summer's barbecue, the house I'd worked 45 years to own outright. And my son wanted me to vanish. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. My reflection in the glass door looked unfamiliar, the set jaw, the narrowed eyes. I didn't open the door. Not yet. Instead, I picked up the cake and the watch, carried them upstairs to my bedroom, and set them on the dresser. The hum of voices outside faded as I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, listening to the muffled sounds of the party. I could still hear Ryan's voice, animated, laughing. No idea his words had lodged like shrapnel. Downstairs, the kitchen clock ticked. I looked at my watch. 7:32 p.m. By 8:55, the lights of the police cruisers would be spilling across the yard and everything would change. I don't remember deciding to go back downstairs, but at some point, I found myself standing at the top of the staircase, listening to the voices outside through the half-open sliding door. The laughter was louder now. Ryan's voice rose above the rest in that confident tone he reserved for an audience. And then he told the salesman we couldn't afford it, right there in front of everyone, like I'm some kid asking for candy. Kyle's laughter hit the air first, sharp and immediate. Derek followed with a mocking classic Thomas. Huh? Always playing with Dad. Melissa's giggle was quieter, but not so quiet that I couldn't hear it from the hallway. I stood there, hand on the banister, feeling the grain of the wood under my palm. The same banister I'd sanded and stained myself 2 summers ago. My house, my time, my money. I stepped down slowly, each creak of the stairs blending with the muffled thump of music from the backyard speakers. The kitchen was empty now, the plates and glasses untouched on the dining table. My roast sat on the stove cooling under the overhead light, ignored. Through the sliding glass door, I saw them, Ryan with a beer in one hand, flipping burgers with the other, like he owned the place. Kyle leaned in close, saying something that made him laugh so hard he nearly dropped the spatula. Derek was perched on the railing, boots on my freshly painted deck, talking to Melissa, who was still glued to her phone. I slid the door open. The sound of the party rushed in along with the smell of smoke and beer. Ryan, I said loud enough to cut through the chatter. Can we talk privately? He turned casual, not a hint of concern on his face. If it's about the grill, I'm keeping an eye on it. It's not about the grill. A couple of heads turned. Melissa glanced up from her phone, eyebrows raised. Kyle took a slow sip of his beer, watching us. Ryan shrugged, set the spatula down, and walked over. All right, Dad. What's so urgent? I stepped aside, gesturing toward the house. Inside, but he didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and stayed put. Whatever you've got to say, you can say it here. We're all friends. I looked at the circle forming around us. Kyle, Derek, a couple of neighbors I didn't know, and Melissa still seated, but watching now. Ryan knew exactly what he was doing. All right, I said quietly. I heard what you said earlier. His expression didn't change. And I want to know if you meant it. He didn't blink. Yeah, I meant it. You hover. You micromanage. You make everything about your expectations. I'm almost 20, Dad. I don't need you running my life. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Kyle smirked. 19 years of effort distilled into a public indictment. You live in my house, I said evenly. Eat my food, drive my car, use my electricity, my internet, and you want me gone? He shrugged. I didn't ask you for any of that. You chose to give it. That's on you. It was like watching a stranger wearing my son's face. The same eyes, the same jawline, but the words were foreign, sharp-edged. Kyle clapped him on the shoulder. He's got a point, Mr. Miller. Parents choose to have kids. You don't get a medal for feeding them. The heat in my chest flared, but I kept my voice steady. Feeding them is one thing. Paying for their entire life at 19 is another. Ryan's smile was thin. I'm sure you'll get over it. And when you finally do disappear, I'll miss the free rent for maybe a week. Then I'll figure something out. Melissa laughed. You're terrible, she said. But her tone was the kind people use when they mean charming. I looked at each of them in turn. My son, his friends, his girlfriend, standing on a deck I'd built, drinking beer I'd bought using a sound system I'd installed. Not one of them looked even mildly uncomfortable with what he'd said. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about one bad night. This was who Ryan had become. The music still played, though lower now, as if even the speakers were waiting to see what I'd do. I felt every eye on me waiting for me to snap, to shout, to make a scene they could talk about later. Instead, I stepped closer to Ryan and said, You want me gone? Be careful what you wish for. I turned, slid the door shut behind me, and left them to their laughter. Upstairs again, I sat on the edge of my bed, elbows on my knees, staring at the watch box on the dresser. My father's voice echoed in my head. A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back. I'd wasted too much of mine trying to make Ryan see me as more than a bank account. That ended tonight. Outside, the laughter swelled again. It was the sound of people celebrating my irrelevance. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a thin folder. A property deed, insurance paperwork, and utility bills, all in my name. Solid, unshakable. By the time the police lights flashed across my yard an hour later, the decision would already be made. The knock on the front door came at 8:43 p.m., 2 minutes earlier than I'd expected. Through the front window, I saw the cruisers angled in my driveway, red and blue strobes washing over the siding. I opened the door for Officer Grant and Officer Ramirez. Both nodded politely. Evening, sir. You called about trespassers. Yes, I said, stepping aside. They're in the backyard. As we walked through the house, the thump of bass from the speakers carried into the kitchen. The officers exchanged a glance, but said nothing. When we stepped outside, the music stopped mid-beat. Conversations cut off. Ryan turned from the grill confusion, sliding quickly into defiance. What the hell is this? He demanded. This, I said, is me granting your birthday wish. Officer Grant's voice was calm, professional. Ladies and gentlemen, the property owner has asked that everyone leave. If you do not, you will be trespassing. Kyle stepped forward, puffed up. Come on, man. It's his birthday. We're not hurting anyone. Officer Ramirez didn't flinch. Not the point. You've been asked to leave. That's the law. Ryan looked at me, eyes narrowing. You're doing this in front of everyone. Yes, I said. In front of everyone. For a moment, no one moved. Then Melissa stood muttering something about not wanting trouble. She slipped past the officers and into the house. Derek followed. Two neighbors I didn't recognize exchanged a look and headed for the side gate, but Ryan didn't move. Your choice, Officer Grant said evenly. But if you stay, we'll have to escort you out. Ryan's jaw clenched. "Fine," he said, finally, grabbing his jacket from the railing. "Enjoy your empty house, old man." He brushed past me, the smell of beer and smoke trailing after him. Back inside, I watched from the living room window as the last of them left. The yard was littered with plastic cups, paper plates, and half-eaten food. The grill still smoked. The sound system sat silent. For the first time in years, the house was quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something tonight wasn't the first step of my plan. It was the middle. The first step had been years ago. Every time I'd let something slide, every time I'd chosen silence over confrontation. Tonight was just me deciding to stop. I locked the sliding door, turned off the porch light, and went upstairs. The watch was still on the dresser. I picked it up, felt the weight of it in my palm, and slipped it back into its box. Ryan had told me to disappear. I was going to do exactly that, but not in the way he thought. The night after the party was the kind of quiet that felt wrong, not peaceful, just empty. The smell of smoke from the grill still hung faintly in the air, mingling with the tang of spilled beer. The deck boards were sticky under my shoes when I stepped outside to close the lid on the grill. Plastic cups were tipped over in the grass like casualties from some small, careless war. I stood there for a while, hands in my pockets, looking at the place where Ryan had been holding court hours earlier. My son in my backyard, surrounded by people who thought nothing of watching him strip his father's dignity away in public. I'd been called a lot of things in my life. Stubborn, overprepared, too methodical, but doormat had never been one of them until now. Inside, the house felt different, though nothing had changed. The roast was still in the pan on the stove. The dining table still had the plates I'd set that morning. The cake, untouched, sat under its clear plastic dome on the counter. The watch box was upstairs on my dresser, its brown leather strap catching a glint of light from the lamp. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking loudly in the stillness. I wasn't replaying the insults. I'd already heard them enough times in my head to know they were permanent. What I was thinking about was the way Ryan had smiled after saying them, like he believed he'd won something. That was the moment the engineer in me took over. I'd spent my career solving problems that seemed impossible until you broke them down into smaller pieces. This was no different. Step 1. Define the problem. Ryan was 19, unemployed, living entirely on my dime. He had no savings, no rent history, and no credit to speak of. His only real asset was the assumption that I would never cut him off. Step 2. Define the objective. Teach him that my support was not a permanent condition, and do it in a way that was clean, legal, and final. Step 3. Identify constraints. I couldn't physically force him out without a legal process. Anything emotional, shouting, arguing, he would twist into me being the bad guy. He needed to see the consequences as his own doing. Step 4. Leverage timing. The arrest had been a gift. 14 days in county jail meant 14 days where he couldn't interfere with anything I did. 14 days of a completely vacant house. 14 days to dismantle the life he took for granted. I went upstairs, pulled a thin file folder from my desk, and laid it open on the bed. Deed to the house. Property tax statements. Homeowner's insurance policy. Bank statements showing every utility, every repair, every grocery run. If Ryan wanted me gone from his life, he was going to get exactly that. And when I was gone, so was the roof over his head. I slept at night with the file still open beside me. The next morning, the sunlight came through the blinds and long stripes hitting the watch box on the dresser. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. My father's voice came back to me. A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back. I'd given Ryan enough of mine. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, the sound sharp in the silence. No footsteps overhead, No door slamming, no television blaring at 11 a.m. It was almost disorienting. I sat at the table with my coffee and started making a list. 1. Contact a real estate agent. 2. Set a fast timeline. 3. Move only what I need. 4. Leave no forwarding address. It was a clean plan. By mid-morning, I was online scrolling through local agents. That's when I found Anna Johnson's sharp suit in her headshot 5-star reviews from clients who mentioned words. I liked efficient, discreet results. I called her office. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Miller, you're looking to sell, yes, quickly." Her tone shifted slightly, the way a professional's does when they sense urgency and commission. "How quickly?" "Within a week." "That's ambitious, but not impossible. Tell me about the property." I gave her the basics. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, updated kitchen, hardwood floors, detached garage, well-maintained. She asked about my motivation for selling. I gave her the shortest version possible. Life change. Time to move on. We arranged for her to see the house that afternoon. While I waited, I started on step 5, inventory and extraction. If I couldn't carry it in my car in one trip, I didn't need it. I pulled 3 suitcases from the closet, laid them open on the bed, and began folding the clothes I wore. Tools I valued went into a small locked box, personal papers into a briefcase. By the time Anna arrived, the master bedroom looked like someone was in the middle of packing for a long trip, which in a way I was. She walked through the house with her phone out, snapping photos, making notes. "This will show beautifully," she said in the kitchen, running her hand over the granite countertop. "You've taken good care of it." "I have," I said, "but it's time for someone else to enjoy it." She gave me the market rundown, comparable sales, and current buyer demand. "If we list at $945,000, I expect strong interest. Cash buyers are moving fast right now. I'll agree to $950,000. And if we close in 8 days, I'll add $6,000 to your commission." Her eyebrows lifted. "Consider me motivated." We signed the paperwork at my dining table, the same table I'd set for Ryan's birthday dinner just 24 hours earlier. That night, I stood at the upstairs window, looking out at the street. The house was dark, except for my bedroom lamp. Across the way, Peter Collins was bringing in his recycling bins. Peter and I had been neighbors for nearly 30 years. He was steady private, the kind of man you could borrow a ladder from, and know it would be returned in the same condition. I knew if I asked him to keep an eye on the place for a couple of nights, he wouldn't pry. I'd need that soon. 3 days later, Anna called. "We've got a serious cash offer. Full asking price, no contingencies. Closing date in 6 days." Perfect. Ryan would be released in 7. That meant by the time he came home, the deed would already have changed hands. I accepted the offer on the spot. In the days that followed, I worked methodically. Changed my mailing address to a P.O. box. Closed the joint cell phone plan Ryan had been on since college. Canceled utilities effective the day after closing. The rest of the time I packed. Not the way you pack for a move. No boxes labeled kitchen or bedroom. Just the essentials, a few photo albums, my father's watch, the tools I couldn't replace. The house began to look less like a home and more like a model property again staged for strangers, which was fitting. On the 4th day, I drove to the county jail, not to visit, just to confirm the release time. The desk sergeant told me Miller Ryan. Release scheduled for 1000 a.m. on the 15th. I thanked him, turned, and walked out. There was nothing I needed to say to Ryan face to face. The note I was planning would do all the talking. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with a sheet of plain stationery. No letterhead, no frills. I wrote slowly, carefully fitting the words into exactly 2 sentences. Ryan, you said the best gift I could give you was to disappear from your life. I'm granting that wish. The house has been sold. I'll be unreachable. Enjoy the independence you've always wanted. I signed it simply, Dad. I folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote his name in block letters across the front. The plan was simple. The new owners would hand it to him when he showed up. The morning of the closing, I walked through each room one last time. The living room where Ryan had opened Christmas presents as a boy. The hallway where his height marks still faintly showed on the wall. The kitchen where his mother used to hum while cooking. I didn't linger. By 200 p.m., the house belonged to Miguel and Sofia Rodriguez. They arrived with their 2 children and a moving truck, smiling, excited. Miguel shook my hand firmly. Sofia thanked me for leaving the place in such good condition. I have one favor to ask, I said, handing her the envelope. If a man named Ryan shows up here in a few days, give him this, please. She nodded without hesitation. Of course. That afternoon, I wheeled my suitcases next door to Peter's house. He opened the door with a curious look. Can I crash here for a couple of days? I asked. Sure, he said, stepping aside. Everything okay? Everything's fine, I said. Just between houses. He didn't push. That was Peter's way. From his upstairs guest room, I had a perfect view of my former driveway. In the morning, Ryan came home. I'd be able to watch everything without being seen. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about seeing the lesson land. And it would, you remember the lights I mentioned, the red and blue washing over the yard like a storm tide. Here's what happened that night. The part my mind kept replaying while I packed signed papers and set the rest of the plan in motion. After I slid the door shut and left Ryan to his audience after the officers asked people to leave the backyard then fast, beer bottles were gathered in nervous hands. Jokes turned to awkward coughs, and Melissa, being practical when it counted for her, ducked into the house and out the front door without a goodbye. Kyle and Derek lingered just long enough to prove a point to no one. Then they were gone, too. In 10 minutes, the music was off. The grill sputtered alone, and the night air carried only the sizzle of fat cooling on steel and the distant hum of the freeway. Ryan brushed past me when he finally moved jacket half on, beer still in his hand, like a prop he couldn't set down. "Enjoy your empty house, old man," he said. There was no anger in it, not even contempt, just a kind of polished indifference, the tone of someone who believed he'd scored a point he'd always be proud of. He turned up the collar of his jacket, cut across the lawn, and disappeared through the side gate. The house inhaled. I could feel it. The quiet was so complete, it seemed alive, like the place had been waiting years for the moment it could be entirely itself again. I locked the slider, turned off the porch light, and did a slow loop. Kitchen lights, hallway lights, front porch, and deadbolt. Habit. Control what you can control. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard it. The rattle of the side gate. A dull thud against the fence. Another one louder. Then the sharp, insistent bang of an open palm on aluminum siding. Open up, Ryan's voice. Raw now. Not the confident performance he gave on the deck. This one had edges. I could picture the flush in his cheeks, the 2 wide eyes. When the crowd disappears, the stage gets really small really quick. I went back down the stairs, not in a hurry. Took the time to flip on the front hall light. Through the peephole, I could make out his shape swinging around the corner from the side yard, his hand already lifted to hammer the door again. I cracked it an inch and put my shoulder against the frame. "Go home, Ryan," I said, the way you'd tell someone to put down a hot pan. Calm, factual, unimpressed by the heat. "This is home," he snapped, pushing at the door with a sloppy kind of bravado that made him seem 15, and that was half the problem. He'd learned too well that leaning means people move to keep you from falling. Not tonight, I said. Not like this. He took a breath I could hear through the crack, stepped back, and for a second I thought he might have decided to walk away. Then the handle jerked hard. He threw his shoulder into the wood. My feet slid half an inch on the rug. The deadbolt caught the force and translated it straight into the bone of my forearm. Stop. He threw his weight again. Something metal on the porch clattered, maybe the decorative lantern his mother bought at a summer market the year before she died. The sound did what his words hadn't. It cut into me. Ryan. I made his name into a full sentence. Walk away. For a moment, he did nothing. Then he stepped so close that the peephole filled with the blur of his breath. Call them, he slurred. Call your friends in blue. Let them cuff the birthday boy. See if that gets you the sympathy you want. I don't need sympathy, I said. I need sleep. I closed the door the final inch and turned the deadbolt fully until the brass stopped. My hands didn't shake. I let that register. Some part of me had switched over from father to homeowner, a cleaner job with specific rules, steps you could point to in a manual. He banged on the door again, then on the front window, then on the siding to the left of the door. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, as if trying to invent a beat that would draw the crowd back. The house didn't answer. The phone was in my hand before I thought about it. I didn't dial right away. It wasn't fear holding me back. It was the memory of a boy who used to sneak into our bed after a nightmare when he was 7. A memory so vivid I could smell the shampoo his mother used on his hair. Then the day he outgrew that and stopped. Then the day he learned there were other ways to stop needing you that don't involve any bravery at all. I dialed. The dispatcher who answered could have been anyone. Calm voice, scripted empathy. Sir, is he inside the home? No. Is he attempting to force entry? He's trying. I've asked him to leave. He refuses. Do you feel unsafe? No. I feel tired. A pause at that. We'll send a unit, sir. I hung up and turned off the front hall light. Through the side window, I could see him pacing, hands rubbing hard through his hair, eyes darting to the street as if a sponsor might pull up with an explanation. There was no one left to sponsor him. He tried the handle once more. Then he kicked the base of the door, an uncoordinated shot that caught carpet and would both. I didn't speak. There's a kind of silence that acts like space. Put enough of it between you and a problem, and you can see the edges. The cruisers turned the corner quicker than I expected. Their lights splashing color on the white hydrangeas my wife had planted along the porch. The yard glowed like a bad dream about a good neighborhood. Officer Grant again, this time without Officer Ramirez. He moved like a man who knew the steps of this dance by muscle memory. Evening, he said, voice pitched so it could be heard without escalating anything. He put a palm up toward Ryan the way you do to show a dog you're not a threat. What is this? Ryan tried to give his anger a shape. He's kicking me out of my own house on my birthday. It's not your house, I said. It's mine. The way you'd point out the address on a package delivered to the wrong door. Grant split his attention cleanly the way a good cop does. Sir, to me, steady and professional. You want him off the property? I do. Then to Ryan, the tone not changing at all, which is its kind of message. You've been asked to leave. You need to leave now. I live here, Ryan said, spreading his arms like he was trying to convince the sky. He can't just throw me out. I have rights. You have permission, I said, and I'm withdrawing it for tonight. Come back tomorrow sober and get your things. We'll talk about the rest. Grant kept his eyes on Ryan. That's reasonable. Your father is asking you to leave the property tonight. If you refuse, you will be trespassing. Ryan laughed. It wasn't a sound with any humor in it. "Arrest me," he said like it was a dare. "Make the old man's night." Grant didn't bite. "You don't want that," he said. "Trust me." He waited. Seconds that felt longer than they were. Walk away. There was a version of my son who would have done it. There was another who would have said something cutting, thrown one last punch with words, and left in a shower of his importance. That night I didn't get either one. That night I got a boy who had learned more from his loudest friends than from anything I'd ever tried to teach him. He stepped onto the grass and made a show of walking toward the sidewalk, hands raised. Then he spun back to the porch in 2 long strides and slammed both fists into the door with all the force his anger could translate into movement. The sound brought the neighborhood to its windows. It also brought Grant's hand to his radio. "Unit 37 on scene requesting additional," he said almost conversationally. Then to Ryan, "You're done." Ryan tried to pull loose when Grant took his wrist. It wasn't a fight. It was an argument with physics that he had no chance of winning. Grant turned him the way people do this 1,000 times and learned the safe angles, and the cuffs clicked that little sound that lands like a verdict. "Ryan Miller." Grant said the words. "Even you're under arrest for criminal trespassing and failure to comply with a lawful order. You happy now?" Ryan tossed it at me over his shoulder while Grant guided him down the steps. "This is what you wanted because congratulations. You win." It wasn't a victory. It was a boundary. I kept my hands at my sides. "I hope you sleep," I said. It was the truest thing in me. They walked him to the curb, his movements a messy mix of swagger and stumble. Grant put a hand on the back of his head as he helped him into the back seat, a human gesture inside a policy one. The door clicked shut, the sirens faded, and the yard went quiet so quick it felt like a prank. After the patrol car turned the corner, the house sighed out. I stood on the porch for a full minute, the air cool enough to clear my head. The little lamp on the step was on its side, the glass cracked. I picked it up real careful, like you would an old picture someone accidentally stepped on. I put it on the table by the door. Not because it was a big deal anymore, but 'cause it used to be. The kitchen clock read 9:17 p.m. I poured a glass of water and sat down at the table. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Bettina, long enough that I had to scroll. "This is so cruel. He's your son. It's his birthday. How could you do this to your own family?" The kind of message you get from people who only listen to folks who tell them what they want to hear. I didn't text back. No point in arguing when the law had already done the talking. 10 minutes later, another text. This time from Leopold, with a lot more fire and fewer words. "Total power trip. Just wait till everyone hears you call the cops on your own kid." I flipped my phone face down. Let him get all worked up. They'd run out of people to tell before I ran out of reasons. The phone rang again, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was a polite voice from the county. "Mr. Schmidt, this is the booking desk. Your son has been processed. Standard holding for tonight. You can contact the jail for visitation hours and release information." Just the facts, nothing else. I took another sip of water, then stood and rinsed the glass like it was just any other night. Then I headed upstairs to the room that had been ours before my wife died, and had slowly become just mine. I slept, but not great. Enough, though. The morning was just a regular morning. The sun came through the blinds, making the same stripes on the carpet it did yesterday. The fridge hummed its tune. I made some coffee, and the smell of a new start filled the kitchen. I sat at the table with my mug and, for the first time in a long time, didn't listen for footsteps overhead. I wasn't waiting for a complaint about the internet or the temperature. The quiet wasn't empty, it was neutral. That's a good place to start. At 10:25, I called the jail and asked the questions the voicemail had taught me. The woman on the other end had a voice like a well-used pencil, not soft, not sharp, just durable. Booking number? I gave it to her. Charge? I repeated what the officer had said. Release date, 15 days. Standard for that kind of thing, unless a judge changed it. Release at 10 a.m. on the 15th. You can call back on the 14th to confirm. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. There's a certain relief in getting straight answers. By the time I hung up, the plan I'd come up with last night was solid. 15 days. Not a long time. More than enough. You already know some of what I did with that time. I called Anna Wagner. She looked at the house. We put it up for sale in a hurry, and a good offer came in. The whole thing wasn't about getting revenge. It was about getting clear. I shut down the phone plan my son had been on since college. I gathered up a pile of mail with his name on it, a flyer from a gym he never used, a credit card application he didn't qualify for, and an ad from a gaming store offering trade-in bonuses for a system I'd already helped him upgrade twice. I stacked him up and didn't feel a thing. Around noon, the phone rang again. It was a call from the jail. I let it go to voicemail and listened. You have a collect call from... And then my son's voice, clipped and angry. Gujar, an inmate at Santa Clara County. The system asked me to press 1 to accept. I didn't. He tried twice more that day and again the next morning. The third time I answered. You gotta do some things, not for them, but for yourself, just to be sure of what you've decided. Dad? His voice was distant, that slight hollow sound of a call coming through a system meant to hold people in. You made your point. Come get me out of here. 15 days, I said. You'll be fine. You think I'm scared? He laughed, and I could finally hear it, the crack in his voice, the little boy fear he wasn't ready to show anyone else. This is a joke. They're putting me in with guys who did real things. All I did was knock on a door. You refused to leave when you were asked. I told him. That's not just a knock. That's a choice. I kept my voice calm. Not nice, just calm. Calm is better. You're gonna regret this. He put all his strength into those words, as if saying them would make the walls around him crumble out of respect. You think you win 'cause you got the cops and a mortgage. You think that makes you a man. I let him finish. Then I told him the most important truth I knew. Being a man means not mixing up love with a paycheck. I should have taught you that sooner. I didn't hang up. I just waited to see if he was listening at all. The line went quiet, the way it does when the talking is done, but the understanding hasn't started. The automated voice reminded us both that our time was up, and the call ended. I put the phone down and made my to-do list for the afternoon. Bank P.O. Box Utilities. It felt less like a chore list and more like a list of things I was finally doing for me. The days passed with a steady rhythm. Anna Wagner worked fast, like she had a mission. She took professional photos, wrote up a listing that sold itself, and had an open house right when the listing went live. By the end of the second day, she had offers. By noon on the third, the Muller family had one that fit perfectly with what I was looking for. Cash. No nonsense. Done. When I told Anna I'd take it, she let out a sigh of relief into the phone that made me like her more. You're doing the right thing, she said. People always say that when you're helping them make money. I didn't need her to be right. I needed her to be effective. She was. Packing has a certain feeling to it. You decide who you are every 5 minutes, with no one watching. You wrap something your wife loved, not because you need it, but because your hands remember how it felt in hers. You leave a stack of old t-shirts you wore fixing things on Saturdays, because the guy who wore them is either gone or they won't help him anyway. You take the pictures, not the frames. You take the watch, not the cufflinks. You take the letters from your father, not the Christmas cards from people who never knew where to send him after you stopped having dinner parties. The morning we closed on the house, I drove downtown with 3 bags in the trunk. I left him there while I signed the papers. Mr. Muller's handshake was solid. Mrs. Muller's eyes had that look people get when they've been saving up for something that seemed bigger than they were, and all of a sudden it fits. I liked them. That helped. When I walked back into what used to be my kitchen, with the keys in Mr. Muller's hand, my name was gone from the paperwork, and I was free. The house was the same, but it wasn't mine anymore. It didn't hurt. It didn't make me feel better. It just told the truth. "Can I ask a favor?" I said, and handed Mrs. Muller the envelope with Gunther's name printed on the front. She took it and tapped it twice with the serious, yet casual way someone accepts a small but important job. I took my bags next door and knocked on Johann's door. He opened it like he always did, with a small smile and kind, quiet eyes. "Guest room's ready," he said before I could even ask. I nodded and rolled my life right into his house, like it was always supposed to be that easy. He didn't ask questions. The world is made by men who know when to shut up. From Johann's upstairs window, I could see the Muller kids playing in the yard that used to be a soccer field when Gunnar was 9. Mr. Muller carried a box that said, "Kitchen stuff." Mrs. Muller stood in the doorway, her hands pressed to her cheeks, holding in a little bit of joy and a little bit of fear. I watched him for about 15 minutes. It was a little bit of good luck I wasn't expecting. That night, my old house glowed with a different kind of light. Not better, not worse. Just the light of a family being right where they belonged. I lay on the guest bed, listening to the soft noise of Johann's dishwasher, and felt something inside me finally let go. 2 more nights went by like that. I didn't sleep a lot, but I slept clean. The kind of sleep you get when you use a ruler to draw a straight line after drawing crooked ones by hand for too long. On the 3rd morning, a voicemail showed up on my phone. It was from a number I didn't know. The voice was softer than the one I'd come to expect. It was Bettina. "Mr. Schmidt," she said. I wanted to say I didn't know it would go that far. I didn't mean for it to. He's scared. He won't say it, but he is. I don't know what to do with him when he's like this." She paused. "Anyway, I know you did what you had to do. I'm sorry." Then the beep and the little icon on the screen that promises something you'll never get. I didn't call her back. It's because when apologies get passed around by other people, they never arrive the way they were meant to. The day before Gunnar was getting out, I walked a long way around the block and let myself feel the distance. The jacaranda trees on the corner were shedding their purple flowers like the street needed a softer rug. I stopped at the bakery and got a coffee I didn't need and a cinnamon roll I didn't finish. I let the sugar melt on my tongue and didn't chase it with anything else. I looked at the people waiting for the light to change and wondered how many of them had ever been asked to disappear by someone they had helped become a person. Back in Johann's guest room, I folded the same 3 shirts I'd folded 2 days before. I put the watch back in its box, then took it out again, because that's what memory does. The note for Gunnar was in Mrs. Muller's kitchen drawer, right where it needed to be. The end of my story, and the beginning of his. That night, Johann knocked once and came in. He handed me a glass of water, because he knows alcohol might make sense in stories like this, but not in the lives of the people who actually lived through him. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "For him," I replied. "And for you too," he said, and let that hang in the air, not like a challenge, but like a chair to sit in. The next morning, I set my alarm for 9:05 a.m., but was up at 7:20. The air coming through the open windows smelled like fresh-cut grass and a hint of someone's breakfast burning. Cars zipped by like quick thoughts. At 9:55, I stood at the window and put my hands on the sill. For the first time in months, I wasn't getting ready for a hit. I was watching the storm I had predicted finally roll in. At 10:03, he turned the corner. He walked like a man getting his life back. Kinda fast at first, then slower as the details didn't line up with what he expected. Same trees, same mailbox, same front walk. But not the same voices, not the same door, not the same feeling that the world had been waiting for him. He reached for the key out of habit, and did that half-juggle a man does when his hand comes up empty. He knocked. The sound floated up to me, still, a human thing. Mrs. Muller answered. I watched her go from welcome to caution in one breath. Mr. Muller stepped in behind her. I couldn't hear the words, and I didn't need to. 30 seconds later, I saw the envelope in his hands. I saw him look at the name I had written. I saw him read it. He read it again. And then again. He sat down on the step with the envelope still in his hand, and his plastic jail bag at his feet. There was no one watching but him. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I didn't feel proud. I just breathed, in a way I hadn't in years. You can call it revenge if you want. It wasn't. Not the way people mean when they talk about revenge. This was a lesson, a line in the sand, and a gift I should have given us both a long time ago. He sat on the step for 5 minutes. Then he stood up, folded the envelope carefully, and walked away without looking up at the window where his father watched him finally meet a boundary no one could move for him. I let him turn the corner, then I sat on the edge of the bed and tied my shoes. It was time to get gas and a map, and put some miles between the life I had found and the life I could live. The road, the ocean, the keys sliding into a new lock in a town where no one knew my name or his, that's another part of the story. For now, this part ends where the night with the lights had to end, with a door I owned staying closed, a law I didn't write doing its job, and a house becoming a home for someone who wanted it. The rest of the story is waiting where the highway meets the water. 3 days went by without a call from Gunter. I didn't expect one. Pride can build higher walls than any county jail. But small towns have their own ways of watching. No cameras, no mics. Just porches, routines, and the way people look up when a car they know too well slows down where it doesn't belong. Johann saw him first. He was on his porch with the same chipped mug he'd used every morning for as long as I'd known him, the kind with a small crack that never gets bigger. When I went out to water the rosemary along his walkway, the least I could do for crashing in his guest room, he spoke softly. He tried the door at 9 last night. I didn't have to ask whose door he meant. Johann's mouth turned up in a shrug. Polite voices, firm voices. He brought a bottle of wine, which wouldn't have worked anyway since the Mullers don't drink. I could picture it perfectly. Gunter on the porch of a house he once thought was his with Mr. Muller's shoulders as a wall behind Mrs. Muller's gentle kindness. No yelling, no scene. Just a boundary, which can hurt more than screaming because there's nothing to fight but yourself. I thought he might sleep out there to protest, Johann added. He didn't. Pride doesn't like mornings. That last part stuck with me all day. I didn't call him, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because anything I said would sound like I was rubbing it in. He needed to figure this out without my voice telling him how to feel. That's how a lesson sticks. On the 4th afternoon, my phone lit up with his name. The picture in his contact was him and Bettina on a beach last summer, her sunglasses on her head, his grin wide. It made something in me ache. I let it ring an extra beat, then answered. Dad, he said. The word sounded like he was trying it on, unsure if it still fit. "We need to talk." "Where?" I asked. "Java Junction." 40 minutes. The coffee shop is a couple of blocks from the high school. It's the same place I used to take him on Saturday mornings after he got a good grade on a test. Back then, he'd get a frozen mocha with a mountain of whipped cream. The man waiting for me now had an espresso. No sugar, no milk. A different kind of performance, maybe. He didn't stand up or smile when I got to the table. "Mr. Muller said you sold the house without telling me," he said. "I didn't have to tell you," I said. My tone wasn't mean, just a statement of fact. I did what I had to do. He stared at the table, tracing a dark line in the wood with his finger, like a kid following a maze with a crayon. "You knew I was in jail," he said finally. "You sold it while I was locked up." "Yes." "Why?" The question wasn't yelled, and that made it hit harder. "Because it was the only time I knew you couldn't get in the way, play games, or stall," I said. "You told me to disappear. I chose to do it cleanly." His jaw clenched. A vein in his temple pulsed with something he couldn't name. Fury, shame, sadness, all fighting to be the main emotion. "Bettina's not happy," he said, forcing out a dry laugh that fell apart at the end. I didn't take the bait and ask how she was. He kept going anyway. "She says she needs time. Says she has to think about her future, and it doesn't fit in a storage locker." I kept my hands around my cup. "Did you expect her to help you carry boxes?" The question wasn't mean. It was like a surgeon's knife. He looked up at me, anger and hurt on his face. "Are you proud of yourself?" "No," I said. "Proud isn't the word for any of this. What word would you use?" "Necessary," I said. "And overdue." The room filled with silence. The cafe smelled the same as it always had: coffee, cinnamon, and dish soap from the sink. Two high school kids in leather jackets were arguing softly about a track time that might have been recorded wrong. The barista, a woman my age with a tattoo of a ship's anchor on her arm, wiped down a table. "You keep saying I told you to disappear," Gunter said, leaning forward. "I didn't mean it that way." "You meant it exactly that way," I said. "You said forever." "You had a crowd when you said it. You had an audience. You chose the version of me that looked best to your friends." A muscle in his cheek jumped. "That was a joke." "It wasn't," I said. "A joke is something people laugh at together." "What you said was something you wanted them to laugh at me about." He picked up his tiny cup and put it down again without drinking. "You know what's funny?" he said. "You keep using words like choice and necessary, like they're neutral. They're not. They're weapons you chose cause you knew I didn't have any." "That's not true," I said. "You have the only weapon I don't: youth. You have time, and you're spending it like it's a credit card someone else is paying for." The line was a third cup between us, bitter and honest. He stared at his hands. The thumbnail on his left hand was ragged where he'd been biting it. A small, white blister showed on his finger. Maybe from a jail tray, or just from the way stress affects men who never learn to use their hands for anything but pointing. "Can I stay with you?" he asked, not looking up. The words crawled out of his mouth. There it was, the moment I'd played over in my head 100 times. It would be so easy to say yes. To tell myself it was temporary. To let 5 nights in Johann's guest room turn into 10. To call that love. "No," I said. He snapped his head up. "No," I said again. "You can stay 1 night at a motel. I'll pay for it." I pulled a card from my wallet and slid it across the table. "Tomorrow you go to the Workforce Center on 27th Street. Ask for Mara. She runs the orientation. You sit through it, no matter how boring it is. Then you come back here and show me the paper that says you did it. I'll buy you dinner. You're making me jump through hoops for a meal? He laughed, uglier this time. What is this, some kind of play? It's a plan, I said. Something other than just living off other people's money. He didn't take the card. He looked at it like it might burn him. I'm not a child, Dad. No, I said. You're 19, which means if you were a child, we'd be late for kindergarten orientation by about 14 years. The barista looked over. Gunter saw her and his face went red. You think I haven't tried? He said. Every job listing wants 3 years of experience I don't have. What are you sending? I asked. To what jobs? And what are you writing about yourself? He looked at his phone, the table, me. What does it matter? It matters a lot, I said. When you write the truth on paper, you gotta live it off paper. He pushed back his chair and stood too fast. The legs scraped the floor. You know what? Forget it. Keep the lecture. Keep the motel. Enjoy your little win. He took a step toward the door and stopped. He looked like he was about to say something else, something that would hit hard. He didn't. He shoved his hands in his pockets and left without looking back. I sat there after the door closed, watching the empty space where he'd been. The tattoo on the barista's arm flexed as she picked up a tray. Anchors hold things in place. Sometimes they drown him. On my walk back to Johann's, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't know. Mr. Schmidt, this is Anna, Bettina's friend. I thought you should know something. A pause. I don't want to be in the middle, but you don't deserve to be blindsided. Another pause. Then a photo. Bettina at a bar I knew, leaning into a man I didn't recognize. Her smile wasn't even for the camera. The timestamp was 2 nights after Gunther's release. I didn't feel like I'd won. I wasn't even surprised. Some truths don't come out until they can pretend to be a favor. Thank you, I texted back. Nothing more. Johann was on the porch when I turned the corner. How was coffee? He asked. Complicated, I said. He held out a beer. I took it, but didn't open it. We sat in silence that felt like a bench, not a wall. Across the street, Mr. Muller unloaded a box labeled kitchen glasses, with a care that made me like him all over again. Mrs. Muller laughed at something one of the kids said, and the sound was light, not getting in our way. You know, Johann said after a bit, you can't keep your kid from falling. The best you can do is make the ground honest. Honest ground, I said. I think that's what I've been building all this time without the guts to admit it. He nodded. Courage shows up late. Still keeps the appointment. That night around 10 p.m., my phone rang again. It was a voicemail. Bettina's voice, softer than her text messages used to be. Mr. Schmidt, she said, I didn't mean for any of this to get this far. He's scared. He'd never say it to you, but he is. I'm sorry for my part. She didn't ask me to call back. She just put the apology out there. I didn't reply. Apologies that get passed through other people always have another agenda. I've made my peace with the fact that not every sorry is mine to hear. The next day, I did what I always do when worry clouds things up. I made a list. It wasn't a list of how to fix my son. It was a list of how not to fix him. There's a difference. Don't loan cash. Don't offer a couch. Don't call employers for him. Do answer the phone. Do say what's true. Do offer what one man offers another when he's down, a way out, not a free ride. Around noon, he texted. Is the motel offer still good? Yes, I wrote. The Maple Inn. Reservation under your name. 1 night. Check in after 4. What about tomorrow? He wrote. Orientation. 27th Street. Ask for Mara. Bring ID. A long pause. Then, fine. The Maple Inn looks like 100 other motels. Faded sign, a chain on the pool gate, a vending machine that eats your dollar. A minute later, when I pulled into the lot to make sure he was there, I saw him standing outside room 21. He was staring at the key card like it was written in a foreign language. He didn't see me. I didn't say a thing. He slid the card in the slot, waited for the green light, and didn't flinch. Small wins mean the most to people who never learned how to count M. Back at Johann's, I ate a sandwich over the sink. The house next door was alive in a good way. No blaring TV, no loud bass. Just the sounds of a family putting plates in a cabinet they actually plan on using. I let my shoulders relax. You can't fake that sound. You can only get out of its way. At 6 p.m. my phone buzzed. A photo from Gunter. The bed in the motel room was unmade, the place as beige as all pain is when it isn't put on for a show. "I'm here," he wrote. 3 words. Not a performance, just proof he was alive. "Good," I wrote back. "Eat something. Set an alarm. Orientation is at 9 sharp. Be early." "You gonna be there?" he asked. "No," I wrote. "You are?" At 7 p.m., Anna texted again. I told Bettina to give him space. She wrote. She didn't listen. But she won't make it worse. At least not on purpose. I'll try. My first thought was to tell her it wasn't her job. My second was to remember that people in their 20s think loyalty means trying to fix each other's messes. I wrote back, "Thanks for looking out for him as a person, not a project." She sent a single heart. The world is changing. But that heart still means what it always did. That night, I lay in Johann's guest room and listened to the traffic. Not loud, but there. The kind you forget you're hearing until your brain reminds you what it's like to have a little bit of normal. I thought about my father's watch in the drawer, and that line he always said on Sundays. "A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back." I'd finally stopped wasting mine. At 8:52 the next morning, he texted a photo of a brick building with a sign that said, "Workforce Center." There were a few people out front with clipboards and coffees. "Here," he wrote. 5 minutes later, a second photo, a close-up of a schedule with orientation 9 a.m. circled, and the name, Mara, with a little smiley face, like she'd been doing this long enough to know a person's hand makes things seem more real. At 10:12, in session. Boring as hell. At 11:03, resume workshop next. Do I put the jail thing? I stared at the question longer than I should have. The need to protect him is stronger than most things. But protection is often a lie we tell love when we're scared. No, I wrote. You don't lie. You don't offer it up. If they ask, you tell the truth. Just the facts. No confession. At noon. Done. The paper says I showed up. They gave me a list of temp jobs and 2 warehouse leads. One is overnight. Pick one. I wrote. Apply today. I'll buy dinner at 7 if you bring me proof. He didn't reply. I put my phone face down and stared at the ceiling. I didn't pray, but I made a place in my chest for something besides fear. At 6:30, my phone buzzed. A photo of a filled-out application. A second one, an email confirmation from a warehouse in the industrial park. Then a third, with no message, a selfie in a mirror I knew from the Maple Inn. His hair was combed. He wore the same wrinkled button-down he wore to his high school presentation when he argued that school should start later. His mouth wasn't smiling. His eyes looked like they'd borrowed a pair that could see past tomorrow. 7 at Java Junction, he wrote. 7, I replied. He was already at a table when I got there. He had a glass of water. No coffee. He pushed a piece of paper across the table like it was a passport. They said they'll call in 3 days if they want me for the graveyard shift. He swallowed. I put you down as an emergency contact. Okay, I said. It was a single word that meant more than any praise ever could. We didn't talk about Bettina, or the guy in Anna's photo, or the Muller's house. We just ate 2 sandwiches and split a cookie, because that's what you do when there's enough humility in the room to make sugar taste real. On our way out, he hesitated. I can't live at the Maple Inn forever, he said. It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. I know, I said. Tomorrow, I'll show you how to get on the wait list for the transitional housing by the river. It's not fancy. It's safe. He nodded. He looked at me like he was trying to see the person he knew, inside the person he had put in a box for years. You meant it, he said, talking about me disappearing. I did, I said. From the parts of your life that pretended to be mine. Does that mean from me? No, I said. It means I'll be where a father belongs when a son is a man. On call, not on payroll. He stared at the floor. When he looked up, he didn't make a joke. Okay, he said. Okay. On my walk back to Johann's, the purple flowers were falling again, and my shoes lifted the petals instead of crushing them. The Muller kids were out on the porch, drawing a hopscotch board on the walkway I used to clean up every spring. Mr. Muller gave me a wave when I walked by. Mrs. Muller had a smile that lit up her whole face. Things were happening just as they should. Back in Johann's kitchen, I washed my hands and just stood there, holding a towel until my fingers stopped shaking. He slid a plate of cut-up peaches across the counter. How's your ground? He asked. Honest, I said. For once. He nodded. That's where people learn to stand. That night, I lay awake listening to the little sounds a house makes when it's just fine. A pipe ticking, a vent sighing, the soft slosh of a dishwasher that's never had to bargain for a paycheck or for love. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, the kind of sound you hear in movies when somebody's leaving, even if you're not. I thought about the ocean I was still planning to drive to, not as a way to escape, but as a new address. And I thought about my son, all alone in a room with a bedspread that was older than he was, holding a plastic key and a piece of paper with his name printed by a stranger. It was proof that he had shown up somewhere, and that somewhere had counted him as present. It wasn't a win. It wasn't a loss. It was the only thing that's ever really changed a man, the moment he decides to stand up without someone holding him up. The next morning, I drive him to the housing office and wait in the car while he went in alone. I'd point out the one line on the form he would probably want to skip and tell him that if he filled it out, they'd call him sooner. I'd drink coffee that tasted like waiting. And if that warehouse called, I'd be the emergency contact who didn't come to the rescue, but just answered. Yes, that's my son. Yes, he can be reached at this number. Yes, he will be there on time. That's mercy without a handout. Love without a disguise. Boundaries that don't need to brag. Some stories end with a door slamming shut. This one, if I had anything to say about it, would end with a door opening from the inside. Gunnar didn't come back to the house for almost a couple of weeks after that day in the driveway. I had half expected him to show up the very next morning, pounding on the door, yelling for answers, maybe even trying to get inside. But he didn't. The silence just kept on stretching. And in that silence, I worked. Not the kind of work you do with a hammer or concrete like I'd done for a lot of years. This was a quieter, sharper kind of work, where every single thing mattered and one mistake could ruin the whole plan. The house wasn't mine anymore. The Mullers had moved in and were making it their own. Mr. Muller's truck was always parked nice and neat in the driveway. Mrs. Muller had already hung flower baskets on the porch railing. I drove by once or twice, not to rub it in, but just to make sure everything had gone exactly as I'd planned. It had. I wasn't worried about the house anymore. My focus was on the second half of the plan. The letter. It wasn't just any letter. It was a complete, documented record of every bad decision Gunnar had made to get himself to this point. Every insult, every betrayal, every wrong choice that had cost him my trust. I wanted it all laid out, not as an angry message or as revenge trying to pretend it was honesty, but as a solid record, something he couldn't twist into his own version of the story later. I started with dates. The year he dropped out of college, even though I'd offered to help him stay. The month he sold his mother's ring without telling me. The night he stood in my kitchen and said that Bettina's dream was more important than paying back the money I had loaned him. And of course, his 29th birthday, when he told me to get lost. Each thing had its own section in the letter. Not emotional paragraphs, just the facts. But I knew that facts, when you put them together carefully, could hit harder than any insult. But I didn't want the letter to just be about him. I wanted it to be about me, too, about what I had chosen to do after that moment in the driveway. So I told him, in writing. I told him about the call I'd made to Anna Wagner within an hour of him leaving that day. I told him about the cash offer from the Mullers and how I'd taken it right away. I told him how the paperwork had been signed over before he even realized the house was no longer mine to give. And then I finished the letter with the line I'd been waiting for a couple of weeks to write. "You asked me to get out of your life." I listened. Now the house, the yard, the driveway, they've all gotten out of yours. I hope you enjoy the gift. I didn't mail it right away. Timing was important. The next Thursday, I finally got the call I'd been waiting for. "Dad, we need to talk." Gunther's voice was tense, almost formal. "About?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what. "This is serious," he said. "It's about the house. I don't live there anymore." I told him. He was quiet for a second. "Yeah, I noticed." There it was. That little crack in his voice, the first sign he was starting to realize the ground had moved under him. "Where are you staying now?" I asked. "With Bettina's parents," he muttered. "But we can't stay here forever. We have plans." That word again. Every time he'd used it, it meant something for him, never for us. "I'll be in town tomorrow," I said. "Meet me at O'Malley's Diner. Noon. Bring your appetite." The next day, I got there a bit early. O'Malley's had been our place when he was a kid. Saturday mornings after his Little League games, we'd sit in the same booth by the window. He'd have a chocolate milkshake, and I'd have black coffee. I didn't know if he'd remember or even care. Gunnar walked in a few minutes late. No smile, no handshake, just a stiff nod before he slid into the booth. "You sold the house," he said, skipping any kind of hello. "Yes." "Why?" "You knew we were counting on it. Bettina and me." "Bettina and you don't live there," I said, cutting him off. "It was my home. My decision." His eyes narrowed. "It wasn't just your home. Mom lived there, too." "It was ours," I said, my voice even. "And when she was gone, it became mine to decide what to do with it. And I decided." He let out a big breath, leaning back in the booth. "So what now? You expect me to just figure it out?" "Yes." He gave a short, mean laugh. "That's it? No offer to help? No guilt?" I reached into my coat pocket and slid an envelope across the table. He stared at it for a second before he picked it up. "What is this?" "Read it when you're alone," I said. "Not here." He didn't open it in the diner. He just stuffed it into his coat like it was nothing. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I drank my coffee. He kept fidgeting. Finally, he stood up. "I guess that's it," he said. "I guess so." And then he left. 2 nights later, at 12:42 a.m., I got a call. My phone lit up with his name. "Dad?" His voice cracked. "I read the letter." And there was a long pause. So long I thought he might have hung up. "It's all true," he finally whispered. "I know. I don't know what you want me to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "Just don't lie to yourself about how we got here." He didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing, slow and shaky, then, almost whispering, "Bettina's thinking about leaving. That's her choice," I said. Another pause. "I think I made a mistake." "Which one?" I asked. He didn't answer. That was the last time we spoke for almost a month. In that month, I kept busy. I met with Anna again, not to sell anything this time, but to set up a trust with the money from the sale. It wasn't for Gunnar. Not now. Maybe never. Instead, I put the trust in Hannes's name, my grandson, Gunther's son. He was only 7, but I wanted to make sure he'd have something one day that nobody else's bad decisions could take from him. When I signed the papers, Anna looked up from the folder. "You're sure about this?" "Yes," I said. "It's the only thing that makes sense." One Saturday afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch of my new place, smaller, quieter, just right for one person, a car pulled up. It was Gunnar, alone. He didn't get out right away. He just sat there, with the engine running, staring at the steering wheel. Finally, he turned the engine off and walked up the steps. "I got your letter out again," he said. "I've read it 6 times now." "Good," I said. "I still don't agree with everything," he added quickly, "but I understand why you did it." That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. We didn't fix everything that day. We didn't hug it out or make promises we couldn't keep. But as he left, I noticed he looked lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd started to see the difference between losing something and just letting it go. And me? I finally felt like I had control of the story again. The first thing you learn when you stop rescuing someone is how much noise the world makes. The fridge hums like a bass note. The clock ticks like a metronome. A neighbor's sprinklers start to rattle. Cicadas buzz in the oak tree by Johann's porch. And somewhere, a screen door claps shut in a rhythm that sounds like the end of a sentence. I lived inside that sound for a while, and just let it do what it does best. It turns drama into regular life. Gunnar texted me twice that week. The first was a photo of a piece of paper with a paperclip. "Orientation completed. Resume workshop completed. Job search group, optional, with a question mark next to it." The second came at 8:11 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Warehouse called. Graveyard shift starts Thursday." There was no exclamation point. That was the most grown-up thing he'd done in years. "Call me if they need your emergency contact to confirm anything," I wrote. "They won't," he replied. And then, after a minute, "But thanks." I put the phone down and felt my shoulders drop half an inch. That afternoon, I ran into Mr. Muller in front of what used to be my house, but was now his. He was adjusting the lawn mower, checking the blade with 2 careful fingers, the way men who respect machines do. "You did the right thing," he said, not looking up. "For who?" I asked. "For the house," he said. And then he met my eyes. "And for the man." He didn't have to say which one he meant. Mrs. Muller came out with a dish towel in her hands, the kind of little detail that makes a peaceful home. "He came by again," she said, her voice polite but not stiff. "Your son." He asked if he could see the backyard one last time. I told him no. But he asked nicely this time. He said, "Please." "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, really confused. "For telling me the way you just did," I said. "That's a better report card than any I've seen in years." She smiled at that, a full-faced smile you can feel in your bones. "We'll keep the hydrangeas," she said, nodding at the white flowers by the porch. "Your wife's?" "Yes," I said. The word was a knot that loosened up inside me as it came out. 2 nights later, at 12:19 a.m., my phone vibrated. A number I didn't know, but with the warehouse's area code. "Mr. Schmidt?" "Yes." "This is Anna in dispatch over at Northwood Freight. Your son put you down as an emergency contact. He's here early. Just thought you'd want to know." "Thank you," I said. And then, because the truth needed to be said out loud, "I do want to know." There was a pause. "We don't give many early," she said. A little bit of softness came through her professional voice. "Thought it was worth calling once to let a parent hear good news." I slept until 5:30 without waking up. It felt like swallowing a little piece of sunshine. By Friday, the calluses had started to come back at the base of Gunther's fingers. The real kind, not the hard shell a constant smirk puts on a face. He texted me a photo of his palm. The skin was red and blistered where a handle had rubbed wrong. "What do I do about this?" he wrote. "Neoprene gloves with a leather palm," I wrote back. "Harbor Supply on 12th Street. Buy 2 pairs. Switch 'em out. Let your hands get used to the work without bleeding every night. Thanks. Eat protein before you go in," I added. "Not sugar. Nuts, eggs, canned tuna if you have to. And water. You'll feel stupid carrying a big bottle. Feel stupid and hydrated." 3 dots appeared, then stopped. Then started again. Okay. He didn't ask for money. I didn't offer it. Love can hand a man a tool without also handing him your wallet. Saturday morning, I walked to the farmer's market and just let the normal joy of people who had nothing to do with me wash over me. People were arguing about peaches with the same seriousness they'd use for politics. And a kid was crying over a dropped croissant with such pure grief that 3 strangers bent down at the same time to try to fix it. I bought some tomatoes I didn't need and bread I wouldn't finish. On my way home, my phone buzzed. "She left," the text said. No name, no pronoun. It didn't need one. Bettina had moved out. A minute later. "Says she needs stability. Says I can't give it to her." I stopped under a jacaranda tree and let the shade do its thing. Purple petals covered the sidewalk like confetti after a party no one wanted to clean up. "I'm sorry," I wrote. 2 words, nothing else. Not, "I told you so." Not, "She wasn't good enough." Not, "You'll be better off." Just the truth that belonged to me. He didn't write back. The unspoken words lifted off my shoulders. That afternoon, Johann knocked once and came in carrying 2 folding chairs he'd found at a garage sale a long time ago. He set them on his small lawn, handed me one, and sat down with that old man groan we pretend we're not making until it's too late. "Word is Bettina is driving south," he said, like a weather report. "Word travels," I said. "It always does," he said. And then he gave me the look that meant it was time to say the thing we'd been avoiding so that the silence didn't have to say it for us. "I never liked her, Klaus." "I know," I said. "She liked your house," he said. "A lot of people did," I said, and tilted my chair so the front legs were an inch off the grass. We sat there for a while, the kind of while that, if you're lucky, you get once a week with someone who knows not to fill it. "Across the street, mister." Muller came out with a tape measure. He ran it along the porch and nodded to himself, like measurements were prayers. Mrs. Muller watched from the doorway, her hand shading her eyes, a gesture women have used for thousands of years, though the sun has never once cared. At dusk, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a screenshot of a social media post, the kind that lives in dark corners. A photo of the red and blue lights outside the house a couple of months ago, and a caption that read, "Imagine calling the cops on your son. Some people should never be parents." And under it, Bettina's name. Below that, comments, "Monster wears suits. Boomers are abusive. Pass it on. He was probably controlling for years. I know families like this. So toxic." Then, another screenshot from a different friend, Anna, whose number I now had. A newer post she'd written under Bettina's, the digital version of putting a hand on someone's chest without pushing them. "There's more to this story than the photo. Maybe don't judge anyone based on one picture." A heart, two hearts. A small hand trying to hold a line against a tide. I didn't reply to either. It turned out the world could roll its eyes at me without me needing to roll mine back. That felt like a better kind of power. Sunday came with the bell at St. Stephen's, a sound I used to hate when it meant keeping a baby quiet for 45 minutes. Now, it was just a reliable part of the week, like garbage day. Gunter texted me at 4:02 p.m. "Court on Wednesday. They said it's a formality. The judge will probably just count the time I already served and give me probation. Can you be there?" "Yes," I wrote. "I'll sit in the back." "Okay." The courtroom smelled like old carpet and cleaner. The benches were narrow, wooden, built to remind you not to get comfortable with being in trouble. The air conditioning whistled through the vents with more confidence than the people sitting under them. I sat in the back as I'd promised, and watched a line of small tragedies. A kid in a hoodie who thought being loud meant you were innocent. A woman my age who cried quietly into a napkin that left lint on her face. A man in a tie explaining to a judge that the sign hadn't said, "No parking," during the 15 minutes he parked there. When they called, "Gunter Schmidt," he stood up in the second row and walked forward without acting angry. The judge looked at a screen, made a sound like she'd seen this 1,000 times, and said, "Criminal trespass, failure to comply. Mr. Schmidt, time served. 12 months probation, fines as ordered. Complete a conflict de-escalation class, and show us proof within 90 days. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," he said. His voice was clear, not loud. The sound of the gavel is always smaller in real life than in movies. It's just a piece of wood hitting another piece of wood and calling it authority. He turned, saw me, didn't say anything, didn't wave, just saw me. It was enough. Outside, he joined me in the shade under a city maple tree. "Thanks for coming," he said. "You asked?" I said. "Men should get what they ask for once in a while, to learn how to be careful with it." He gave a half smile, a look made of humility, and a little bit of pride he could keep without needing to show it off. "I have the class schedule," he said. "Fridays at 7 o'clock. It's funny," he added. "What is? The guys in there? We all think we're the reasonable ones. You might be," I said. "Just not the only one." We walked to the parking lot like two men who knew how to end a conversation at the right time, before words could ruin what the silence had already agreed to. That night, I checked my bank app and moved another part of the sale money into the trust I'd set up for my grandson, Hannes. There were forms on forms, and the cool, clear satisfaction of numbers replacing the warm, fuzzy feeling of, "I'll help out one last time." When the confirmation chimed, I pictured Hannes at 9, at 13, at 21, and wondered if he'd ever know that the money waiting for him had started as a roof his father thought was forever, and only became love when it became a choice. On Thursday, the warehouse put him on the schedule for 5 nights in a row. He texted at 3:18 a.m. Harder than I thought. Not impossible. 2 minutes later, there's a guy here named Udo. 57. Says he started late. Says late is better than never. Listen to Udo. I wrote. Men like that have the kind of shortcuts that don't end up costing you more later. At noon the next day, I took him to the transitional housing office by the river. The receptionist had bangs that looked like she'd cut them herself in a bathroom mirror, and eyes that said she had no time for being mean. We have a waiting list, she told Gunter. But you jump ahead. If you show us, you jump ahead. Proof of a job gets you ahead of a guy with a story. I have both, he said, and slid the paper across the counter. She looked at the schedule like it was a passport stamp and stamped back. When we left, he let out a breath from somewhere deeper in his chest than usual. They said a week, he said. Maybe sooner if someone drops out. Someone always drops out. I said. Show them you won't. We stood on the curb looking at the river the city had tried twice to clean up and 3 times to forget. He said, without looking at me. Bettina called me selfish. She said I'm exactly like you. I just let the sentence sit there and didn't swat it down like a fly. What do you think? I asked. He kicked at a spot on the concrete that used to be gum and now looked like a map without borders. I think I was selfish in ways I made look like I was being a good guy, he said. And I think you gave me a house and called it love. Both can be true, I said. He nodded. I'm trying not to be either now. Johan was waiting on his porch when I got home, because some men have a sense that goes off when people they care about have had a big day. He didn't ask for all the details. I just gave him the score. He showed proof. He got bumped up. Good, Johan said. You going to move soon? Yes, I said. After he's in, and they've seen him show up for a couple of weeks with no drama. Where? The coast, I said. A small town where the biggest problem is which fish to lie about. He grinned. Make it a good lie, he said. If you're new, you might as well aim for legend. That night, Bettina's mother called me from a number I didn't have saved. Her voice was like someone trying to hold her house together in the middle of a party. Klaus, I just wanted to say we tried. Gunter is a lot. Bettina is a lot. This whole situation is a lot. Thank you for letting my son stay with you for a few nights. I said. You didn't have to do that. We owed a version of ourselves that likes to think we would, she said and laughed. A small laugh with no joy in it. Anyway, if he calls you, please answer. He pretends he doesn't, but he responds to your voice. I will, I said. 2 days later, the call I'd been waiting for arrived at 4:06 p.m. The transitional housing coordinator. Mr. Schmidt, we have a bed for Gunnar. He's on the graveyard shift, right? We can give him the bottom bunk so he doesn't wake the others. Thank you, I said. And then, because real gratitude feels good to say, thank you, Gunnar texted a photo about an hour after he checked in. A narrow bed, a gray blanket, a locker with a dent in it that looked like a fist had decided to own something. It's not bad, he wrote. Smells like bleach. That's a better smell than most. I wrote. It is. Congratulations. It's a step, not the end. I know. A pause. Can I call you before I go in tonight? Not for a ride, just to say something before the noise starts. Yes, I wrote. When he did, his voice had that steady, quiet way it had when he was a kid, and he'd show me a Lego thing he made and didn't ask for praise, but just the names of the parts he didn't know. Is there a trick to making coffee that doesn't taste awful? He asked. There is, I said, and told him about putting a little salt in cheap coffee grounds, about rinsing the filter, about the water being just below boiling, about not letting it sit on the hot plate until it tastes like punishment. He didn't joke. He didn't say thanks. He just said, "Okay," and hung up to go be where he said he would be when he said he would be there. I stood in Johan's dark kitchen with my hands on the cool edge of the sink and let a feeling I hadn't trusted in years rise up and just sit there without needing an explanation. Not pride, not relief, not victory. Just the simple human feeling of hearing a man you love standing on his own 2 feet. There would still be bad nights. I wasn't dumb enough to think this was a perfect fairy tale. There would be days he slept through his alarm, or when the foreman picked someone else. There would be texts I didn't want to get and calls I didn't want to answer. There would be, if I know anything about how life works, at least one moment when it looked like all the good things were about to get washed away. But there's a sound that happens when a man faces his mistakes honestly. It's quieter than you think. It's not a big drum roll. It's the sound of boots on concrete at 11:54 p.m. The pause at the break room sink while water runs over hands that are learning how to heal the right way. The click of a locker closing without a slam. And the soft sigh a man lets out when he sits on the edge of a bunk and knows that while the bed isn't much, he made it himself. And tonight, he would sleep in it because he'd earned it. That night, just before midnight, he texted me a photo of his gloves on the break table. "Second pair. You were right. Udo's a beast. He's teaching me how to stack stuff without my back killing me." Good. I wrote. Ask him what to do when the boss pretends not to see you. He'll know. At 3:13 a.m., my phone buzzed again. And for once, I didn't hate the hour. He said, "Keep moving where they can't ignore your motion." I put the phone down and laughed softly in the kind of darkness that makes a man feel like he's not just borrowing the night, but he belongs to it for a few minutes. Keep moving where they can't ignore your motion. I wrote it on a little card and put it next to my father's watch. In the morning, I made a list, just like I always do. Only this time, it didn't feel like I was getting ready for a fight. It felt like I was making a choice. Call the Coast Realtor back. Book 3 nights near Bandon. Tell Johan the date. Write Hannes a letter for when he's older. Put it with the trust paperwork. Buy Gunter a good thermos. Leave it at the front desk with no note. I checked off the last one before lunch. It felt right to let the thermos say what needed to be said. I believe you're going to need coffee for a while. I believe you'll still be there to drink it hot. Late that afternoon, the sun shined through Johan's window and turned the dust into little galaxies. He looked up from the newspaper and said, "You look like a man standing in a doorway." "I am," I said. "You going to go through it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Soon." "Good," he said, and went back to his crossword puzzle. After dinner, I took a long walk past the river, then around the block with the jacaranda trees. In front of the warehouse, a few men were smoking, their faces lit up by the orange glow of their cigarettes. A guy I knew from the way he walked and his calm patience stepped out of the shadows. Udo. He didn't say my name because we'd never officially met. He didn't need to. He flicked his cigarette away with the gentle, rude way men have for habits they haven't earned the right to judge yet and said, "Your boy's learning." "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me," he said. "He is. That's the whole point." And then he went inside, the motion sensor light turned off, and the night did what it always does. It just kept going. When my phone buzzed at 5:05 a.m. with, "Shift over. Feet hurt. No disasters," I didn't answer. It felt right to let his words just stand there on their own. Mercy without a handout. Love without a disguise. Boundaries that don't brag. I said those things to myself, and let them be the foundation while the rest of the building was being built. The next day, I signed the lease on a small place by the ocean, where the windows opened up to a horizon big enough to hold the past without letting it take over the whole view. I told Johan the exact date, and he pretended to be surprised, because that's how men give each other permission to leave without it looking like they're abandoning them. I put my suitcases by the door, and slept one last night in a room that had held the weight of an entire season and never once fell apart. That night, I stood in the kitchen and wound my father's watch until the second hand moved as steady as a breath, then set it down and listened to the house settle. Somewhere, 2 dogs barked at each other, then called a truce. A train made its long sound. Out there, my son was sitting on a bus or on the low bunk of his bed, learning what it felt like to arrive at a place he chose because he was tired of places that chose him. Consequences have a sound. So does recovery. I'd forgotten that. Now I could hear both, and the space in between them was where I planned to live. When Sunday morning came, I was up before the sun. Not because I couldn't sleep, though that had been true for months, but because I needed to see something for myself. The air was crisp, the kind of October cold that carries the smell of wet leaves and with smoke. I made coffee in the old pot, black, no sugar, and stood by the kitchen window. From there, I had a perfect view of my driveway and the street. At 8:12 sharp, I heard the sound of a beat-up Chevy pickup. Gunther's truck. I knew it from the dent in the passenger door, and the way the muffler rattled when it just sat there. Bettina was in the passenger seat, with sunglasses on even though the sun wasn't high enough to need him. They didn't see me, or maybe they just didn't care. The truck drove by my house. No, not mine anymore, slowing down as it got to the mailbox. Gunter leaned out, looking at the Muller's new landscaping, the fresh paint on the shutters, the way the front lawn looked like someone had combed it. Bettina said something I couldn't hear, and Gunter gave a short, mean laugh. Then the truck drove on. I knew where they were headed. 2 blocks down, on the corner, was a small rental place that used to be an insurance office. I'd seen them going in and out of it a few times since the eviction. It was barely big enough for 2 people, but it was all they had left. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitterness sit on my tongue. A year ago, Gunter had been walking around this neighborhood like he owned it, because he literally did. Now he was driving by in a truck that sounded like it would fall apart at the next stop sign. I wish I could say I felt like I'd won, that I loved the sight of it. But the truth is, what I felt was quieter. It was the same feeling you get when you finally pull a splinter out of your hand. Relief, yes, but also the faint pain of knowing it had been a part of you for way too long. By the middle of the morning, I had visitors. Mr. and Mrs. Muller pulled into the driveway, my old driveway, with bags of groceries. They were all smiles, waving to me through the kitchen window, like we'd been neighbors for years. Mrs. Muller knocked on the back door. "Klaus, we brought too many pastries from the bakery. Please take some before we eat them all." I stepped outside, the sun warm on my shoulders. "You didn't have to do that. We wanted to," Mrs. Muller said. And Mr. Muller said, "Your coffee is better than mine." He grinned. "I've been trying to make it like yours, but it's never the same." We talked for a while about their jobs, the new neighbors, and the fact that they'd adopted an old dog named Pepper. I noticed how easily they spoke, and how there was no meanness in their words. Before they left, Mrs. Muller said something that stuck with me. "I think houses remember the people who took care of them. This one feels happy again." I just nodded, my throat getting tight. That afternoon, I went for a drive on my own. I wasn't just driving around. I parked across the street from the rental place where Gunter and Bettina were staying. From where I was, I could see through the blinds just enough to see Gunther's shadow moving around. His posture was different. His shoulders were hunched, his steps slower, like the air itself was heavier. Bettina came to the window, and she pulled the blind shut when she saw my car. I didn't stay long. This wasn't about winning. It was about confirming something I already knew. The fallout had started. And it wasn't just about money. 2 days later, I got a call from Anna Wagner, the realtor who'd sold the house. "Klaus," she said, "you might find this interesting." I was at the county office filing some papers, and I overheard a woman, Bettina, I think, arguing about overdue car payments. She mentioned Gunther's name. I thanked her, and after we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. In my head, I could hear Gunther's voice from months ago at his birthday party, when he told me the best gift I could give him was to get out of his life. It's strange. Back then, those words had felt like a knife. Now, they sounded like a promise I was happy to keep. One evening, Johann, the neighbor who'd helped me the day Gunnar was arrested, stopped by. He leaned against the fence, looking like he had something to say, but wasn't sure how. "Klaus," he began. "You?" Imina Izamina. Ryan Miller Guter Keller. Jenna Heike. Max Leo. Don Udo. Officer Grant Officer Fisher. Susan Ank. Walt Eric. Evan Gerhard. Santa Clara County Breisgau Schwarzwald County. Java Junction Coffee Clutch. Fisherman's Hall Fisher Treff. Zamangini text. I'd sent birthday cards with €20 bills tucked in, like decency coupons. I promised myself not to buy more than I could keep showing up to deliver. "How is he?" I asked. "Big," Gunter said, and laughed at himself. "Everyone says that about kids, but it's true. He remembers me, which feels unfair and good at the same time." He looked at his hands. "I want to be better for him. I don't know how to do that without asking you something I don't want to ask." "Try," I said. "I don't need money," he said quickly, as if the rest of the sentence would be less shameful if he got this part out first. I need you to tell me what to do when I don't know what to do. Not just today. Like a plan that doesn't have your wallet in it." The funny thing about finally hearing the thing you've been waiting for a couple of years to hear is how little it moves your face. Relief is quiet. "Okay," I said. "We can do that." He nodded, then reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, creased soft at the corners from being handled too much. He slid it across to me. "What's that?" He pushed a breath through his nose. "Your note," he said. "The one you left at the house. I've been carrying it. I hate it, and I need it." I didn't touch the envelope. It didn't need my fingerprints. "Okay," I said again. We talked in specifics for an hour because speeches never saved a man, and specifics sometimes have. He had the schedule. He had the probation appointment calendar. He'd moved his stuff from the motel to a lower bunk by the river. The housing coordinator had his paperwork in a file with a green tab because green meant, "This one shows up." He held up a cheap thermos, the one I dropped at reception with no note, and said, "It works." Like that was all either of us needed to admit. When the talking ran out, he said, "Can you meet me again next Thursday, same time? If I mess up, I'll tell you." "If I don't, I'll tell you that too." "Yes," I said. "But I'll give you something today, so you know I'm not just saving it for Thursday." I took a folded sheet from my pocket. I'd written it the night before because the truth, when you finally decide to say it, doesn't deserve to be left to improvisation. I slid it across. He didn't open it. He put it in the same inner jacket pocket where the other envelope lived. 2 notes beating against each other like hearts that didn't know yet they were on the same team. We stood. He didn't reach for me. I didn't make him. We walked to the door like men who had an appointment with the rest of their lives. The next week, we met again. He hadn't messed up. He had a callus on the other palm now, to match the first. He'd learned how to tape his wrists because Udo told him tendons hold grudges. He'd bought boots with a sole that didn't slide on diesel-slick concrete. He'd decided Graveyard fit him better than the world he used to perform for, because it didn't require him to be seen, only counted. I put together a budget. He said that was new. He held out a notebook like it were evidence. Read at the transitional place, minimal. Food, protein, rice, vegetables, coffee. Phone plan, prepaid. Savings, €40 a week if nothing breaks. He looked at me like the math might laugh at him. It doesn't have a sense of humor, I said. That's in your favor. He flipped to the last page. I've been thinking about the house. Which part? I asked. All of it, he said, and the way he closed his eyes on the word, all, told me he had finally understood the size of things. I know it's gone. I know it should be. I know I made it into a thing. It wasn't a proof I hadn't earned. But he stopped himself. I'm not asking you to undo anything. I want to understand what you did with the money. The truth? I asked. The truth, he said, and didn't try to make his voice sound braver than it was. I put it in a trust, I said. For Leo. His face went blank in the way a man's does when the emotion arrives before the name for it. For Leo, he repeated, testing the words for bitterness and finding none. He'll get it in pieces, I said. Not all at once. Education, a down payment if he treats Ruth the way men are supposed to. Tools if his hands turn out to want that. It's not to make his life easy. It's to make it honest. He nodded too fast, like the body's instinct to agree could outrun something breaking. He looked at the table, in his notebook, at the window, finally at me. Is any of it for me? No, I said, not because he didn't deserve something in the abstract, but because answering any other way would unwind the line we had finally gotten to hold. He took it without flinching. It surprised me how much that mattered. He swallowed. That letter you gave me last week, he said quietly. I read it twice. You wrote about the trust. You also wrote that I was removed as your beneficiary 3 years ago, and I never noticed. Yes, I was drunk that year, he said. On everything. A beat. I'm not now. I can tell, I said. He tapped his finger on the envelope in his pocket. In your letter, you said there was one thing left to be decided. What is it? The watch? I said, and saw his throat work. My father's. It was always meant for a son who would wear time like a responsibility. His eyes shut for a second, then opened in a slow strobe. You should keep it, he said. You earned it more than anyone. That's not how gifts work, I said. You give them to the person who will honor them the longest. He didn't ask who that was. He didn't have to. 2 days later, we made a Saturday of it. The kind that deserves to be called that with a capital letter, because everyone involved chose to show up. Leo's mother, Heike, had agreed to coffee in the park by the library. She'd always liked me in the way women like the father their partner should have listened to more. She was careful with her eyes around Gunnar, alert for old patterns. I didn't blame her. She had a child to guard. She'd do it even if it meant her arms got tired. Leo ran across the grass with the force of a beagle. 6 had made him aerodynamic. His hair stuck up the way enthusiasm does. He stopped a meter short of me like someone had taught him the geometry of hugs after a pandemic and didn't want to get it wrong. Grandpa, he said. That word landed like a coin in a dish, the right sound in the right place. Hey, buddy, I said, and crouched so my knees could complain privately. He smelled like crayons and cut grass and something sugary. Heike was probably going to pretend she hadn't allowed it. Gunter stood off to the side, hands in pockets, letting the moment do its work. When Leo looked up at him, he took his hands out and made them visible. That small act, hands where a kid can see them, has always seemed like one of the first commandments to me, though nobody put it on stone tablets. We sat at a metal table that had been painted city green 6 times in 20 years. I ordered hot chocolate for Leo and coffee for the adults. When the paper cups arrived, I reached into my bag and took out the watch box. Heike saw it and went still. Gunter didn't move at all. "Leo," I said, "do you know what this is?" "A box," he said solemnly. I smiled. "Correct. Do you want to know what's inside?" He nodded with the full commitment only children and very old men can manage. I set the box on the table and let him lift the lid. He sucked in a breath. Even if he didn't understand the value, he understood the gleam. The face was simple. No diamonds, no tricks, just numbers, and a second hand doing what it had always done. Honor the terms. "This was your great-grandfather's," I said. "He wore it every day. Then it was mine. I wore it when it mattered. Someday, if you honor your word and show up when you say you will, it will be yours to wear." Leo looked at Gunter, because kids take their cues from whom they'll copy. Gunter met his eyes. "You listen to him," he said, voice small but steady. "He knows about time." Heike's eyes were wet. She wiped them the way people do when they don't want to draw attention to their sincerity. "Klaus," she said softly. "I'm not giving it now," I said. And Leo's face fell in a way that told me the lesson was landing in the right order. I smiled. "I'm giving you the promise of it. Promises, like ladders, mean nothing if you don't climb them." He nodded with a seriousness that made me want to check the bolts on every railing he'd ever encountered. Gunter blew out a breath and put both palms on the table. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry." He didn't soften it. He didn't dress it up. He didn't make "for" part of the sentence. "I'm sorry." I kept my eyes on Leo so he could see a man receive the thing boys think will kill them to say. "Thank you," I said. "I accept." Something eased across his face like a not letting go. If you've ever untied a rope that's been under tension too long, you know the noise it makes in your hands. It's quiet and it's everything. We spent an hour on the playground. Gunter pushed Leo on the swing without acting like he was still a kid himself. Heike and I talked about boring things, the rent on her place, the reading log the school sends home, whether 6 is old enough for a pocket knife, and if you sit with a boy and teach him respect for edges. "It is for some boys, not for others." She asked me where I was headed when I moved. "The ocean," I said. "A small place, windows that remember what wind is for." When it was time to go, Leo hugged me with the blind trust that makes men honest. He hugged his father, too. Gunter didn't look at me while it happened, and I didn't make him. Walking back to the car, Gunter said, "I almost asked you for the watch for me." "I know," I said. "I'm glad I didn't," he said. "I don't think my wrist would have known what to do." "Maybe one day," I said, not because I was making a promise I had no right to, but because I wanted him to know that the path to anything worth having goes through 1,000 little choices nobody applauds. 2 nights later, the past tried one more time to reassert itself in the laziest possible way. A screenshot. Bettina again, a new post. A photo of that same night a couple of months ago when the police lights painted the siding. This time the caption read, "Perspective." Sometimes the thing that breaks you is the only thing that got you out. The comments were different now. Less coronation, less crucifixion. Growth is messy. Proud of you for moving on. Wishing everyone peace. I didn't feel anything tidy about it, but I felt dimly that truth had begun to win small rounds in arenas I no longer wanted to visit. Heike texted me a minute later. She's learning in her way. We all are. I wrote back. On Thursday, Gunter brought someone to Coffee Klatsch. Udo. Up close, the man looked like a blueprint for endurance. 57 in his bones, maybe 70 in his knees, 40 in his pride. He stuck out a hand and didn't apologize for the dirt under his nails. You raised him? He asked. I tried, I said. He's raising himself now, Udo said. That's the better news. We talked about forklifts and foremen and the trick to stacking pallets, so they ride out bumps without turning gravity into an enemy. We didn't talk about houses or birthdays or letters that were cut and then cauterized. We were 3 men in daylight, and the conversation didn't need an audience to be worth having. After Udo left, Gunter said, He told me something you'd probably underline. What's that? Choose a heavy thing you can carry every day, he said. Make it your job to become the kind of man who can lift it without hurting anyone. I smiled. Tell Udo I underlined it. I did, he said. He said you would? The Coast Realtor called that afternoon. Mr. Miller. The cottage and banding came through. Small, a little crooked in the right places. Windows you'll want to wipe with your sleeve. Even if you just clean them, it's yours if you want it. I looked around Johann's guest room. The suitcase, the watch box, the stack of letters rubber-banded like they might otherwise escape. I want it, I said. Good, she said. Keys Monday. I told Johann first. He nodded like a man who had been at my departure long enough to recognize its face. You'll bring back pictures of fish you didn't catch? He asked. I'll lie convincingly, I said. Do, he said. It's a kindness to a story to make it bigger when there's no harm in it. I texted Gunter after. I'm leaving Monday. Oh. Small town, windows that do what they're told. You deserve it, he wrote. A beat. Can I help you load the car? No, I wrote, but you can come by Sunday night and say goodbye in a way we won't have to fix later. Okay. A minute passed. Can I bring Leo? Yes. Sunday evening smelled like someone else's soup drifting in from a window left open 2 houses down. At 7, there was a knock that didn't ask to be louder than it was. Gunter and Leo stood there. Leo had a drawing, 4 figures holding hands, labeled in block letters. Mom, Leo, Dad, Grandpa. Heike must have coached him to include everyone who mattered and no one who didn't. Can I put this on your fridge? He asked. You can put it in my car, I said. It's coming with me. He smiled like he'd just been told his handwriting could move across state lines. We sat on Johann's porch because some goodbyes deserve furniture that remembers stories. Johann brought out 3 ice creams in small cups and a dish of sliced peaches because he knows dessert bridges gaps men don't like to admit exist. Grandpa, Leo said, when I'm big, can I have your watch? When you're big and you've earned it, I said. Same as your dad. Same as me. Same as the man who wore it before I knew what time was for. Gunter looked at me then, and there was pride in it without envy, which is as rare as a person who returns your tools cleaner than you handed them. I'll text when I get there, I said. Do that, he said. I'll answer after my shift. We didn't hug like people in movies. We hugged like men who had learned that 2 arms around a story doesn't make it less true. Leo wrapped himself around both our knees and laughed because that seemed like the right sound to make when 2 people who love you are doing something you don't yet have names for. When they left, I stood in the doorway and watched them walk down the path together, small hand and larger hand, the kind of geometry that makes sense no matter where you set it down. Back inside, I took the watch out of its box and wound it. The second hand moved steadily without asking my permission. I set it in the cup holder of the car for the morning, not because I needed to keep checking it on the drive, but because I wanted to see the road with me one last time as mine before it became promise again. On the table next to my father's letters and the trust papers, I set one more envelope. It had Gunther's name in my hand, not block letters, just my hand, because that's what mattered now. Inside, a simple note and a photocopy of the trust summary, the line that said Leo's future had been built out of a past his father had finally stopped borrowing. The note was 11 words. When a man means it, time gives him back his name. I turned off the lights in Johann's guest room, and the house settled into the kind of silence that feels like permission. Tomorrow, I'd drive west until the air tasted like salt and possibility. Tomorrow, a small cottage with windows that did what they were told would learn my footsteps. Tomorrow, the watch would ride with me because time and men get to say goodbye to each other in their own ways. Tonight, I laid down in the dark and let the sound of a man I once rescued walking under his weight be the lullaby I hadn't earned until I stopped singing. I left on a Monday, because Monday is when you start things you intend to keep. Johann stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, like a man seeing off a train he helped lay the tracks for. We didn't say much. He handed me a paper bag with 2 sandwiches, an apple, and a folded napkin that had "Safe Travels" written on it in the blocky handwriting of a man who never wanted to forget what he meant. "Text me when you see water," he said. "I'll send proof," I said. "Lied big about the fish," he said, grinning. "You're new. You haven't earned modesty yet." I put the watch in the cup holder before I pulled away. Not because I needed to look at the time, but because I wanted to see what I saw. We drove like old friends do, quiet for stretches, then catching up without having to retell the parts that weren't worth the air. The road unfurled. The valley gave up its heat. The pines took their turn. And then, around a bend that felt like an apology, the Pacific tipped its whole blue body toward the land, and the air changed. I pulled into a turnout and texted Johann a photo. The horizon, a dull mid-complaint, the watch in the corner of the frame like a witness. "You made it," he replied. "Now go make it yours." Bandon was small and honest. The cottage was smaller and more honest. Still white paint a shade too bright in spots, a porch that tilted just enough to remind you it is alive. The key turned with the satisfaction of a lock that hadn't been embarrassed by a million false starts. Inside, the floors breathed in their seams. The windows did what they were told and no more. The kitchen was a stove, a sink, 3 cabinets, and the kind of counter you measure bread dough on because no one ever taught it marble's bad habit of chilling what ought to rise. I carried 2 suitcases in and set them in the bedroom. I put the watch on the dresser, and it looked right there, as if the wood had been built to hold that weight. I opened the windows and let the ocean paint the air with salt. Then I did the most important thing a man can do when he arrives where he meant to go: nothing. I stood in my silence and let the house learn my name at the same time I learned it. That night, I ate a sandwich over the sink because some habits tell the truth about you better than any speech. I turned the porch light on and listened to the world do its shift change. The ocean spoke in its long syllables. Somewhere down the block, a dog offered commentary and then thought better of it. A screen door made the sound that all screen doors have made since someone first decided bugs were not invited. I slept like a man who had finally chosen where to set his head. Morning came with fog, not a metaphor, a real thing that draped itself across the street and decided which houses deserved to be half invisible. I made coffee with a pinch of salt and a patience that has always felt like prayer, even when I don't call it that. I wrote Leo's name on an envelope and tucked a postcard inside. The ocean is a big clock. It reminds you to show up. I wrote Heike's address and set it by the door. Around 9, my phone buzzed. Gunter got off at 7, slept 90 minutes. Udo says that's what men do when life is temporary. Sending proof. A photo followed, his time card with 4 nights of numbers that add up to honesty. Good. I wrote. Eat before you crash again. Protein water. You know the drill. I do. A beat. You? There I am. I wrote and sent a picture of the porch, the watch on the railing, the fog doing its thing. Looks like a place where mistakes can hear themselves think. That's the plan. I wrote. That afternoon, the realtor handed me a folder with keys, a map, and a list of addresses under the heading Hardware. Grocer post, coffee decent. She had the good sense to leave church off and bar off too. Do you need anything else? She asked. I need the name of a man in this town who knows how to make a roof behave, I said. She smiled. Gerhard, she said, and wrote a number. He's quiet. He knows wood. He knows when to tell it no. I called Gerhard and told him the porch leaned like a man who'd had one drink more than comfortable. He came by at 3 o'clock, set his level down like a priest laying a book on an altar, and nodded at the bubble. She's honest about it, he said. That helps. We agreed on a number and a date. He shook my hand and didn't squeeze too hard. You came here to be left alone, he said. Not as a challenge, just as a statement a man who has seen many arrivals keeps on the shelf. I came here to make good use of quiet, I said. That's better, he said and left. I made a routine. Men like me always do, even when we pretend we're free of the urge. Mornings, coffee, a walk down to the jetty, a wave at the old guys who stand with lines in the water and excuses in their pockets. Midday, fix one thing in the house. Not 2, not 10. 1. A hinge, a latch that complained, a light switch that had learned to stutter. Afternoons. Letters, 1 to Johann, 1 to Leo, 1 to myself, folded in a drawer I promised not to open for a month. Evenings. The ocean on a bench where I let the hum of God, the real one or the metaphor, I don't argue, do that thing it does to men who have learned the difference between noise and something worth listening to. On Thursday, a package arrived, addressed to the Trust's P.O. box I'd set up before I left. The bank had forwarded it like a dutiful clerk. I opened it at the kitchen table with a knife I'd found in a drawer, one of those cheap serrated ones that work better than the expensive kind if you know how to use them. Inside was a thin stack of paper and a cashier's check. The paper was a deposit confirmation. The check was for €500. The name on the remitter line was Gunter Keller. The account number matched Leo's trust. No note, no flourish, no plea for applause. I sat with that for a long time. The ocean talked. The house held still. The watch on the dresser kept its bargains. I finally set the paper under the watch and let the weight of one be the weight for the other. Big twists in life don't always ring bells. Sometimes they're a number with a euro sign that tells the truth more cleanly than poetry. Friday brought rain. Real rain. The vertical kind that thinks gravity is an old friend. I put a bucket under the spot Gerhard had warned me about and pretended that made me a partner in the repair. At noon, my phone rang. A number from town. Mr. Miller, this is Ank from the post office. We've got a certified letter here for you from Breisgau-Hochschwarzwald County. Do you want us to hold it or deliver tomorrow? Hold, please, I said. I'll come in. It was a small envelope with a big seal. Inside, 2 pages. One from the court clerk confirming probation terms completed early. De-escalation class done, fines paid, officer's report clean as you could hope for. The other was a notarized declaration. I, Gunter Keller, hereby waive any claim or expectation of inheritance or beneficiary status from the estate of Klaus Miller now or in the future. This waiver is voluntary and permanent." Below it, a signature I recognized from 1,000 school forms I'd signed when he was too young to know that practice was writing a future. I stood there in the fluorescent quiet of a small-town post office and let the shocks align. The deposit for Leo, the waiver, the early completion notice, the tiny bureaucratic proof that a man had done something harder than a grand apology. He had chosen his target and removed the escape hatch. "Everything all right?" Hank asked from behind the counter, the way people in small towns ask, because they intend to help if you say no. "Better than all right," I said. "It's just rare." "Well then," she said, and stamped a package with more care than it needed. I'm glad I got to see Rare today. On my way back to the cottage, I stopped at the hardware store. The coffee there was terrible in a comforting way. They sold 3 things nobody needed and everything someone would. The man at the counter, Eric, wore a shirt with Eric on it because truth doesn't always need mystery. I bought a proper box for the watch, acid-free, felt-lined, meant for protection as much as display. I bought a thermos because good luck needs company, and I bought a second cheap serrated knife because a man's kitchen drawer should always have one to lend. That evening, I called Johann. "He sent a waiver," I said, without a hello, "and €500 for the trust." Johann didn't whoop. He didn't make the mistake of turning someone else's moment into his celebration. "So he's the guy now," he said. "He's becoming him," I said. "Good," Johann said. "Men look better in becoming than in pretending to have arrived." On Sunday, the fog lifted like a curtain a child was tired of tugging. I walked the headland path and watched gulls hold position over waves like they were tied to something I couldn't see. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Gooter, you at the ocean?" "I am. I'm at the river. They moved me to an upper bunk. A new guy needed the lower." I didn't complain. Udo said that's the moment people notice who's serious. He's right. I did something else. He wrote, "I put my name on a savings account that only lets me take money out in person. No app, no panic transfers." Udo laughed and said, "That's how men like us have to win, by making it harder to lose." I stood at the rail and let the air fill the parts of me that had been undersupplied for years. I got a letter. I wrote 2, actually. I attached a photo of the waiver. No address, no numbers, just the signature. "Okay," he wrote. "Okay. I meant it." "I know. Do you still have the watch?" "Yes." "Keep it." "Not for me. For later." "I'm not asking for it. I'm asking you to keep it where I can't get to it until getting to it would make sense." "Done," I wrote. "Thanks." A beat. "You going to church out there?" I looked at the ocean. I have always been civically religious. I show up. I stand. I sit. I shake hands as appropriate. Faith and I have a truce. I don't boss it around. And it doesn't ask me to explain it. "There's a bench," I wrote. "I go to it. It understands sermons without talking." "Figures," he wrote. "Tell the bench I'm trying." "It can tell," I wrote, and put the phone away. At dusk, a knock came on the cottage door. Not the kind that mistakes urgency for importance. 2 taps, a pause, a third, the rhythm of a person who knows you, not a stranger selling something. I opened it to find the realtor holding a small envelope and a cautious smile. "This came to the office for you," she said. "From a law firm. I figured it might be the kind of thing you'd rather hold tonight than tomorrow." It was. Inside, a single sheet on good paper. Confirmation that the cottage was no longer titled in my name. Not exactly. I had instructed this quietly 2 weeks earlier and then decided to forget, to test whether I was the kind of man who would keep a promise to himself without needing applause. The cottage now belonged to a trust. The trust belonged to Leo. The trust had a clause. Grantor retains life estate with absolute right of occupancy and control until death, at which time the property conveys to beneficiary free and clear. The trustee was a bank that didn't care what your feelings were. The successor trustee was an attorney who signed with a fountain pen older than I am. It was a piece of legal grammar I knew by heart. It was also the truest version of the promise I had decided to make. My name on paper had already begun its quiet withdrawal from the world and all the places that mattered to anyone but the boy who would one day be a man. I set the letter on the table and realized I was crying. Not big sobs, not the kind that makes your chest ache, just water doing what it does when it meets gravity, and the thing holding it back finally decides to be generous. I texted a photo of the first line to Johann and a different photo, more careful, to Heike. When Leo is older, bring him here. Teach him to sweep a porch and respect a hinge. She wrote back a single yes, that I believed more than any blessing I've been handed by a stranger in a robe. I didn't send the photo to Gunnar. Not that one. Not yet. Some gifts don't become gifts until the person on the other end has decided to meet them halfway. The last loose end I've been avoiding came by way of a voicemail on Tuesday. Mr. Miller, this is Officer Fisher. I came across your number in an old report and thought I'd call to say I hope things have settled. Not my business, but some cases stick. He left a callback number. I sat with it and then dialed. Fisher, he said. You could hear the uniform even through the phone. This is Klaus Miller, I said. I wanted to thank you for doing your job the way it should be done. He cleared his throat. We try. Your son, he's doing all right? He's doing what he says he'll do, I said. That's the start of all right. He made a pleased sound. Good to hear. Tell him a cop he doesn't know was impressed and is rooting for him. I will, I said. After we hung up, I texted Gunter. A man you don't know is rooting for you. That's what happens when you mind your side of the line. He sent back the thumbs up, which in our new language didn't mean lazy agreement. It meant he wasn't going to waste words when it was time to work. By the second Saturday, the cottage had adopted my habits. The kettle knew 7:10 was its moment. The door by the kitchen learned to stick unless you spoke to it first. The porch creaked where it wanted to, and Gerhard had taught it to creak more honestly. I took the watch to the bank on Main Street, asked for a safe deposit box, and slid it in alongside a photocopy of the trust summary and the note I'd written for Leo to read when he was old enough to understand the difference between a thing you wear and a thing you live up to. On the way out, I stopped at the bulletin board by the door where people tack up evidence of their lives. A guitar lesson tear-off, a lost cat that will be found or won't. A flyer for a beach cleanup with a photo of last year's haul. All those humble confessions humans make in public in hopes other humans will answer. There was a handwritten index card, too. A2's THS, 7 p.m. M, back room of Fisher Treff. All welcome. A number at the bottom. It wasn't my number to call. It was good to know it existed. That evening, the phone rang at a decent hour, because a man learning decency tries to hit the mark. Dad, Gunnar said, can I tell you something without you fixing it? You can tell me, I said. The fixing will be up to you. He laughed a small, real sound I'd begun to like. There's a guy at the housing place who plays his TV too loud. He knows it. We've asked him. He forgets. Every night, I wanted to rage at him. Tonight, I brought him a pair of earbuds and said, here, helps me on break. He said, thanks. Then he cried. Good, I said. because there are not many better words when men do something that proves they understood the assignment. That's how neighborhoods start. A pause. You know that certified letter you got, he said, and for a second my chest tightened, the old reflex. I'm in it. I signed it because I don't want your money to be the thing we're talking through forever. I know, I said. I also did something else, he said. I called Heike and asked if I could put €50 a week into an account for Leo without her telling him yet. She said yes, if it doesn't make me late on rent. I told her I'd bring receipts. She laughed and said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm trying to be who I should have been." "That's a good answer," I said. "Try it again tomorrow." "I will," he said. "How's the ocean?" "Loud about things that matter," I said. "Quiet about the rest." "Tell it I'm on my way." "Not soon, just on my way." "It knows," I said. The twist, if you want to call it that, did not arrive with fanfare. It showed up as a man doing the arithmetic with his pencil. A week later, an envelope from the bank again. Inside, a deposit confirmation for the trust. Not 500 this time, 200. The memo line, "From Dad." Only this time, it wasn't me writing it. Gunnar had titled himself honestly in the smallest way that matters the most. I walked to the bench by the jetty and sat where I had begun my first morning. The watch wasn't on my wrist or in my pocket. It was locked 3 blocks away under other people's signatures, right where it needed to be. The ocean laid its argument out, in and out, a negotiation perfected into rhythm. Birds heckled. Children shouted about a crab that had the good sense to mind its own business.